The air in Libya in the summer of 1941 doesn't just feel hot. It has a taste. It tastes of fine pale sand, of engine oil baked into the earth, and of the faint metallic tang of distant battles. In the blinding ochre landscape, where the sun scours the sky clean of colour, a captured British workshop stands as a fragile outpost of human endeavour. It is a place of corrugated iron and sandbags, a temporary sanctuary from the relentless glare. Inside the world is a stark contrast of light and shadow. Sunbeams cut through the canvas roof, illuminating dancing motes of dust, while the focused beam of a work lamp throws long, distorted shadows across blueprints and machinery. This is a world where survival is measured in degrees of shade and sips of water, and every sound, the clang of a wrench, the whisper of the desert wind, carries the weight of uncertainty. In this crucible of heat and steel works Alessandro Rossi, a man who seems forged from a different element. A brilliant mechanical engineer from Turin, he is a disciple of precision, a believer in the Italian creed of eleganza e velocità, elegance and speed. At 35, he carries the proud, meticulous air of a man who trusts the clean logic of mathematics over the messy chaos of war. He sees machines as extensions of culture, and in his mind, Italian design is the pinnacle of a superior civilization. He believes warfare should be a ballet of swift, agile predators, not a clumsy brawl. His ambition is not merely to serve his country, but to prove that Italian ingenuity can tame this unforgiving land, to create the perfect desert tank that will move like a gazelle and strike like a viper. Then, one sweltering afternoon, a monster is dragged into his sanctuary. It is a British Matilda the tin tank, a squat, graceless beast of a machine, caked in layers of grime and sand. Its form is a brutal contradiction to everything Alessandro values. It is slow, heavy, and utterly without aesthetic merit. Its armor is not sculpted but layered, pitted with the scars of anti-tank rounds it has clearly shrugged off. The sound of its treads being hauled across the sand is a low, agonizing groan, like some prehistoric creature being pulled from its element. To Alessandro's eyes, it is an insult to the very concept of engineering, a relic from a bygone era of brute force over intelligent design. It is not a weapon, it is a lump of iron. His superiors arrive, their faces grim under the African sun. Their orders are simple and direct. Dismantle it, analyze it, find its weaknesses. They need a report for high command in Rome, a key to unlock the puzzle of this infuriatingly resilient machine. Alessandro and his team of engineers circle the captured tank, their initial curiosity quickly turning to professional scorn. They mock its primitive suspension, its plodding engine, its sheer ugly functionality. With a cynical smile playing on his lips, Alessandro gives the machine its final judgment, a pronouncement that fills the workshop with dismissive laughter. "The British send us a turtle," he declares, "to fight in a land of gazelles." For him, this is not a challenge, but a chore, a simple matter of cataloguing the flaws of an inferior mind. The task, however, is not so simple. The desert itself is an active adversary. The fine Saharan sand, as abrasive as diamond dust, has a supernatural ability to penetrate the most sophisticated machinery, grinding down gears and choking engines. The oppressive heat warps metal and frays tempers, turning every mechanical procedure into a test of human endurance. And always there is the low-grade, persistent fear humming just beneath the surface, the threat of an Allied air raid, a sudden commando attack that could turn their workshop into a crater. The pressure from Rome is immense and impatient. They don't want a philosophical treatise on design. They want answers, and they want them now. Alessandro's intellectual exercise is framed by a very real and immediate danger. As the sun begins to set, casting long purple shadows across the sand, Alessandro stands before the silent machine. The laughter of his men has faded, replaced by the hum of generators and the chirping of insects. He runs a hand over the Matilda's hull, his fingers tracing the deep gouge left by a shell. The steel is still warm from the day's heat. He feels not just a rough, pitted surface, but a story of survival. It is an ugly, stubborn thing, but it is here intact while the men who fired at it may not be. For the briefest of moments, his arrogance is pierced by a sliver of doubt. This tank is a question he has not yet learned how to ask. If you believe some lessons can only be learned by facing what you despise, write humility in the comments. Tonight the deconstruction would begin. The deconstruction began under the harsh, unblinking glare of electric lamps that fought against the encroaching desert night. The air, thick with the day's heat, now carried the sharp scent of cutting fluid and hot metal. Alessandro orchestrated the process with the detached precision of a surgeon, his commands echoing crisply in the cavernous workshop. His team moved with practiced efficiency, their wrenches and crowbars becoming extensions of his will. The first target was the turret, a solid, unadorned mass of cast steel. As the massive bolts groaned in protest and were finally freed, the metallic shriek was a sound of violation. To Alessandro, this was not an act of discovery, but an autopsy. He was methodically laying bare the crude anatomy of a beast, expecting to find nothing more than a testament to unimaginative brute force engineering. He was there to confirm his own biases, to document the obvious flaws for his report to Rome. The first surprise came as the thick frontal armor plates were removed. Alessandro had anticipated finding simple, heavy steel, but this was something different. The casting was of a remarkably high quality, dense and uniform, without the air pockets or impurities his team often found in their own rushed wartime production. The welding, which from the outside had appeared coarse and utilitarian, was revealed to be incredibly deep, bonding the plates with a ferocious tenacity. It wasn't elegant, but it was absolute. He ran his gloved hand over the cross-section of a join, feeling the brutal honesty of its construction. This wasn't the work of an artist, but of a pragmatist who understood that in a battle, a single unbreakable seam was worth more than 1,000 graceful curves. The plates were not merely attached. They were fused into a monolithic shield, a solid wall of defiance. Next, they turned their attention to the engine bay, a compartment Alessandro expected to house a power plant more suited to a farm tractor. When the housing was lifted, it revealed twin Leyland engines side by side. They were not marvels of high-performance engineering. They were simple, robust, and astonishingly accessible. Every pipe, every belt, every filter was placed with a clear, logical purpose, ease of maintenance in the most unforgiving conditions. There were no delicate components, no complex fuel injection systems that would be instantly choked by the fine desert dust. It was a primitive heart, yes, but it was the heart of a plough horse, not a thoroughbred. Designed not for a single glorious sprint, but to toil endlessly without complaint. Alessandro stared at the unadorned blocks of iron and felt the first, unsettling flicker of a thought he could not yet articulate. The team then moved to the suspension, a system they had openly mocked for its archaic, exposed design. As they disassembled the bogies, Alessandro's meticulous sketches began to tell a new story. The system was slow, clumsy, and offered a rough ride, but its genius lay elsewhere. Each component was massive, over-engineered, and incredibly simple to replace. A single damaged wheel or spring could be swapped out in the field with basic tools, a task that on his own elegant Italian tanks would require a fully equipped workshop. The Matilda wasn't designed to dance over the terrain. It was designed to endure it, to crawl over any obstacle with a slow, grinding, inexorable momentum. Its lack of speed was not a byproduct of poor design. It was an integral part of its identity, a deliberate sacrifice made for the sake of unstoppable resilience. A junior engineer, cleaning grime from an interior panel, called out. He had found a series of small, deliberate punch marks hammered into the steel near the driver's seat. They weren't part of the design, nor were they battle damage. They were marks of maintenance, a crude but effective log kept by the crew, tracking oil changes or repairs. Beside them, scratched into the paint, was a single name, Eleanor. Suddenly, the cold mechanical object was humanized. Alessandro realized he had been analyzing the machine in a vacuum as a theoretical problem. But this tank was not a theory. It was a home, a workplace, a sanctuary for the men inside. Every flaw, every crude feature was now cast in a new light, the light of human survival. The design was not for engineers in Turin. It was for soldiers in the middle of this hell. As the night wore on, the workshop grew quiet, the sounds of labor replaced by the soft scratching of Alessandro's pen on paper. He stood before a long table covered in his own flawless schematics, each diagram a perfect representation of a component he no longer understood. The lines were precise, the angles correct, but they captured none of the machine's soul. He had set out to dissect a turtle, to expose its weaknesses for all to see. Instead, he found himself staring at the blueprints of a fortress. The cynical laughter from that afternoon now felt like the foolish bravado of a child. This machine was a riddle, and every piece he had carefully removed and catalogued was not an answer but another, more profound question. He was no longer mapping an enemy's failure, but confronting the limits of his own philosophy. With the deconstruction complete, the machine's anatomy laid bare, Alessandro's work shifted from dissection to interrogation. He ordered the thickest frontal armor plate, a slab of steel he had privately mocked for its brutish, artless form, to be mounted on a rig in the makeshift firing range. The desert air shimmered with heat, distorting the image of the plate until it seemed to ripple like a mirage. His men readied their standard-issue 47mm anti-tank cannon, the pride of Italian artillery, its long barrel gleaming with deadly promise. A confident smirk returned to Alessandro's face. The data from this test would be simple, a clean and satisfying vindication of superior ballistics over crude mass. He imagined the shell punching cleanly through the metal, a perfect circular hole that would be the first sentence in his report on the Matilda's many failings. The command was given. The cannon barked, a sharp, violent crack that ripped through the afternoon stillness. The shell screamed across the short distance, a streak of metal destined to prove a point. But the expected explosion of shattered steel never came. Instead, there was a deafening, resonant clang, a sound like a giant hammer striking an anvil in the forge of a god. A bright, furious spark erupted where the shell impacted, and the projectile, its kinetic energy violently refused, ricocheted off into the sky, tumbling end over end with a frustrated whine. The armor plate was not pierced. It was not even cracked. All that remained was a deep circular gouge, a metallic scar that seemed to mock them. The engineers stared in stunned silence, the smug certainty draining from their faces, replaced by a collective, unspoken question. Shaken but unwilling to show it, Alessandro shifted his focus, his voice a little too loud. The engine. If we cannot pierce its hide, we will discover how quickly its heart gives out. The twin Leyland engines, reinstalled in their housing, were connected to a dynamometer. His team's own Fiat engines, elegant and high-strung, were notoriously susceptible to the fine Saharan dust, requiring constant, meticulous cleaning to prevent seizure. Alessandro predicted this British tractor engine, with its loose tolerances and simple design, would fare no better. He imagined it choking within hours, its oil turning to a gritty sludge, its pistons grinding to a halt. The test began. The engines rumbled to life with a low, uninspired drone, a monotonous sound that promised nothing but toil. It was the sound of stubbornness, not of power, and Alessandro prepared to document its inevitable, premature death. Hour after hour the drone continued, a constant, unwavering pulse in the heart of the workshop. Night fell and the sound became the camp's mechanical heartbeat. Alessandro slept fitfully, waking at intervals to the same monotonous hum. He expected silence each time, but it was never there. When dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and violet, the engines were still running. They ran for 12 hours, then for 24. They did not overheat. They did not falter. When they were finally shut down and inspected, the oil was dirty, yes, but still viscous. The filters were clogged with sand, but they had done their job. This primitive heart, this ugly, unrefined piece of machinery, had endured conditions that would have killed his own nation's more sophisticated designs. It wasn't built for a racetrack. It was built for this. Next came the test of movement. With the Matilda fully reassembled, a driver took it out onto the treacherous, rock-strewn terrain behind the camp, a landscape that would challenge a mountain goat. Alessandro watched from a ridge, his binoculars pressed to his eyes. The tank did not glide or dance. It lurched, it ground, it crawled. The suspension groaned in protest. The treads churned the earth with agonizing slowness. It was everything he despised, graceless, inefficient, and utterly without finesse. Yet it did not stop. It crushed rocks into powder, pushed aside thorny scrub, and clawed its way up steep inclines with an inexorable grinding momentum. He realized he had been judging it against the wrong standard. He was looking for a gazelle, a creature of speed and agility. But this was not a gazelle. This was a tectonic plate of steel moving with the slow, unstoppable certainty of a glacier. During a final interior inspection, A young mechanic called out to him, his voice quiet, hesitant. Tucked deep into a crevice beside the driver's seat, he had found 2 items. The first was a small dented tin of Earl Grey tea, its label faded by heat and time. The second was a photograph, creased and worn, protected by a celluloid sleeve. It showed a smiling woman with a small child on her lap, standing before a simple English garden. The entire workshop fell silent. The mechanical monster was suddenly given a soul. This ugly steel box was not just a weapon of war. It was a shield. It was the single sacred promise meant to carry the man who cherished this photo back to that very garden. For the first time, Alessandro looked at the crude interior not as an engineer, but as a man who understands longing. That night, Alessandro sat alone at his desk, the single lamp illuminating the 2 conflicting worlds before him. On one side were his own beautiful, precise schematics, perfect lines representing an imperfect understanding. On the other side lay the recovered items, the tea tin, the photograph, and a captured British maintenance manual he had initially dismissed. The data from the tests, the numbers and figures swam in his head, a language of logic that now felt inadequate. The machine's resilience was a fact, but it wasn't the answer. The answer, he suspected, lay somewhere else. He pushed aside his own drawings and pulled the manual closer. He opened the simple cloth-bound book, not to find an enemy's secrets, but to understand a creator's purpose. He began to read, the technical jargon slowly transforming into a philosophy of survival, a text written not in ink, but in empathy. The first crack in Alessandro's methodical world came not from a shell, but from a piece of paper. A coded message from Rome arrived with the morning supply convoy, its tone sharp and devoid of pleasantries. The communique was a lash of impatience, questioning the delay in his report. Is the analysis of a single primitive tractor proving too complex for our finest engineers? One line read, dripping with condescending irony. The word stung more than any desert sun. High Command was not interested in nuance or discovery. They wanted a simple, digestible confirmation of their own prejudices. They wanted a list of weaknesses to exploit, a technical justification for Italian superiority. Alessandro stood there, the flimsy paper in his hand feeling heavier than a plate of steel, caught between the truth he was painstakingly unearthing and the convenient fiction his superiors demanded. The desert suddenly felt smaller, the workshop a cage. He retreated to his desk, a battlefield of conflicting evidence. On one side lay his own elegant schematics, testaments to a philosophy of speed and grace. On the other, the stark, irrefutable data from the tests, the scarred but unbreached armor plate, the chart showing the engine's relentless 24-hour performance, the photographs of the tank conquering impossible terrain. He attempted to begin the report Rome expected, his pen hovering over the paper. He wrote the words slow, clumsy, archaic suspension, but the words felt like lies, like a betrayal of the very engineering principles of observation and fact he held sacred. Each tested component, each brutal design choice, was not a flaw but an answer to a question he had never thought to ask. How do you keep a man alive in hell? His pride, his entire professional identity, was at war with the evidence before his eyes. The conflict was not confined to his own mind. His team, men who had once shared his dismissive laughter, now watched him with a mixture of confusion and concern. They had witnessed the same tests, seen the same impossible resilience, yet they remained trapped in the same paradigm of thought as Alessandro once was. His second-in-command, a pragmatic engineer named Marco, finally voiced their collective anxiety. "Commander," he began, his voice low, "what are we to write? That this British lump is designed better for this war than our Ariete? They will think the sun has cooked our brains. Our careers will be finished." The resistance was a wall of cultural and professional dogma. To praise the Matilda was to criticize their own creations, to admit that their beautiful, swift machines were tragically, fatally flawed for this new kind of war. Seeking refuge from the doubt of his men and the demands of his superiors, Alessandro once again turned to the captured British maintenance manual. He now read it not for its technical data, but for its soul. The language was plain, utilitarian, utterly lacking in the poetic bravado of his own nation's military doctrines. Yet within its simple instructions, he found a profound and recurring philosophy. Phrases like crew survivability, Ease of field repair and operational endurance appeared again and again. It dawned on him that the British had not designed a tank. They had designed a promise. A promise to the crew that their machine was, above all, a sanctuary. Every design choice that he had initially labeled as primitive was, in fact, a deliberate sacrifice of performance for the sake of resilience, a testament to a culture that valued the life of a single soldier over the abstract pursuit of mechanical perfection. That evening, under the solitary glow of a work lamp, Alessandro unrolled one of his own designs from a canister. It was a concept for a future Italian tank, a machine of breathtaking elegance with sharp angled lines and a powerful high-revving engine. It was a Predator, a mechanical cheetah designed for a swift, clean kill. He held the blueprint, a testament to his life's work and beliefs, and looked across the workshop at the squat, silent form of the Matilda. His design was beautiful, a work of art. The Matilda was an anvil, a rock, a thing of brutal purpose. In a gesture that felt both like sacrilege and liberation, he slowly crumpled the blueprint in his hands, the crisp paper groaning in protest. He was not just destroying a drawing. He was surrendering a lifetime of beautiful, flawed ideas. He walked towards the Matilda, the silence of the vast workshop amplifying his footsteps. The machine seemed to absorb the light, its dark green paint a patch of shadow in the brightly lit space. He reached out and placed his palm flat against the cold steel of the turret, over the spot where the name Eleanor was crudely scratched. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine the man who had etched it there. He pictured him inside this steel womb, the world outside a screaming chaos of fire and shrapnel, his only faith placed in the thickness of this armor. He imagined the man's quiet moments, brewing tea, looking at the faded photograph of his family. The machine was no longer an enemy combatant. It was a vessel of hope, a crude, ugly, and profoundly noble guardian. The conflict was no longer technical. It was a matter of life. Returning to his desk, Alessandro felt a strange calm settle over him. The pressure from Rome, the worried glances from his men, the ghost of his own shattered arrogance, it all remained, but it no longer held power over him. The truth he now understood had a weight and a clarity that transcended opinion or ambition. He swept the crumpled blueprint and the half-written, dishonest draft of his report into a bin. He took out a fresh sheet of paper, dipped his pen in the inkwell, and felt the resolve harden within him. He would not write the report they wanted. He would write the one they needed to hear. He would tell them the story of the turtle, and why in a land of fleeting gazelles it was the turtle that would inherit the desert. His first line was not about steel, but about purpose. With a steady hand, Alessandro began to write, the scratching of his pen the only sound in the vast, silent workshop. His report did not open with statistics or schematics, but with a confession of flawed philosophy. He wrote of the Italian obsession with the swift, decisive strike, the colpo di grazia, and how it had blinded them to the true nature of this war. Here the enemy was not just the British soldier, but the desert itself, an adversary of infinite patience and corrosive power. The Matilda, he explained, was the first machine he had ever encountered that was not designed to fight the desert, but to coexist with it. It did not try to outrun the sand or overpower the sun. It was built to endure them. Its entire design was a testament to a different creed, not elegance in motion, but resilience in stillness. It was a weapon born from humility, not arrogance. He then turned his analysis to the armor, describing it not as a component, but as a promise cast in steel. He detailed the exceptional quality of the casting, the deep, uncompromising welds, and the sheer brutish thickness that had so easily defeated their finest anti-tank guns. This was not merely a shield, he argued, but a psychological weapon. For the men inside, this monolithic hide created a sanctuary, a bubble of perceived invincibility amidst the screaming chaos of battle. It allowed the crew to remain calm, to serve their guns with methodical precision, even as enemy shells hammered against the hull like futile fists. The British engineers had understood a fundamental truth. A soldier's courage is finite, but it can be powerfully reinforced by the absolute conviction that his machine will not fail him. The armor was the physical embodiment of that sacred trust between man and machine. Next, his pen moved to the heart of the beast, its twin Leyland engines. He meticulously detailed how their primitive design was, in fact, a masterpiece of environmental adaptation. He explained the concept of loose tolerances, not as a manufacturing flaw, but as a deliberate defense against the fine, grinding silica of the desert, which would seize a high-performance engine in hours. The accessibility of every component, the simplicity of the fuel and cooling systems, these were not signs of a lack of sophistication, but of a profound understanding of field maintenance. The Matilda's heart was not that of a sprinter, designed for a single glorious race. It was the heart of a draft horse, built to toil endlessly, to beat with a steady, reliable rhythm day after day, week after week, asking for nothing but fuel and basic care in return. He addressed the suspension, the very system his team had once mocked with such casual disdain. His diagrams now illustrated its hidden genius. He admitted that its slow, lurching ride was a necessary sacrifice. In return, it offered unparalleled durability and ease of repair. Each bogie, each spring, each wheel was a massive, over-engineered piece of iron that could be replaced by a weary crew with simple tools under the cover of darkness. This, he wrote, was a logistical masterstroke. While his own nation's more complex tanks would be crippled by a single broken torsion bar, left stranded, waiting for a recovery vehicle, the Matilda could heal itself on the battlefield. It did not skim over the treacherous terrain. It consumed it, its inexorable crawl a symbol of its core identity. It was designed to always, under any circumstances, keep moving forward. The report then shifted from the external to the internal, exploring the machine as a habitat. Alessandro described the layout of the crew compartment, noting how every design choice served the endurance of the men inside. The placement of the ammunition racks for easy access, the periscopes that offered protection without sacrificing visibility, even the small, incidental spaces that allowed for the storage of personal items like a tea tin or a photograph. He argued that the British had designed the tank from the inside out, starting with the soldier and building the machine around him. This human-centric philosophy was the Matilda's most potent secret. It wasn't just a weapons platform, it was a life support system. Its ultimate effectiveness was not measured in speed or firepower alone, but in its ability to keep its crew alive, sane, and willing to fight another day. In a final, unifying section, Alessandro articulated his central discovery. The Matilda's strength was not found in any single component, but in the perfect, harmonious synthesis of all its supposed weaknesses. The heavy armor was made possible by the powerful low-revving engines. The slow speed was a viable trade-off because the armor could absorb incredible punishment. The simple suspension was necessary to carry the immense weight of it all. It was a closed loop, a self-reinforcing system of survival. He had been a fool, he wrote, to analyze the parts in isolation. To do so was to miss the point entirely. The Matilda was not a collection of compromises. It was a singular, brilliant answer to a single, brutal question. How do you build a machine that can conquer the most unforgiving place on Earth? Yet as he laid out this comprehensive mechanical and philosophical analysis, a final, deeper question began to form in his mind. He now understood how the tank worked and what its purpose was. He had unraveled the logic of its design, a logic born of pragmatism and a deep respect for the environment. But he did not understand the why. What kind of culture, what national mindset produces such a machine? A people who would so readily sacrifice glory for grit, speed for safety, elegance for endurance. He realized with a startling clarity that he had dissected the machine, but he had not yet understood the men who had conceived it. The steel had yielded its secrets, but the soul of its creators remained a mystery, a final layer of truth he had yet to uncover. It began without warning as a change in the quality of the light. The brutal white sun was suddenly veiled, the sky turning a sickly yellow-brown, as if a great sickness was descending upon the land. A profound, unnatural silence fell over the desert, swallowing the familiar sounds of the workshop. Then came the first whisper of wind, a low moan that quickly escalated into a high, furious shriek. The air thickened, becoming a solid, moving wall of sand that scoured everything in its path. Men shouted, their voices instantly snatched away by the gale. Tents tore from their moorings, and loose sheets of metal cartwheeled into the blinding chaos. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sound and fury, an elemental rage that sought to erase every trace of human presence from the face of the earth. The Ghibli had arrived. Amidst the desperate scramble for cover, Alessandro found himself standing frozen for a heartbeat, staring into the roaring brown void. His office, his barracks, they seemed 1,000 miles away, fragile structures of wood and canvas about to be torn to shreds. His eyes fell upon the solid, unmoving silhouette of the Matilda. It was an instinct, a primal urge that bypassed all rational thought. He ran, head down against the stinging blast, his feet sinking into the rapidly accumulating sand. He clawed his way onto the hull, the metal already gritty under his palms. With a strength born of desperation, he heaved open the heavy driver's hatch and tumbled inside, pulling the thick steel plate down behind him. The hatch closed with a deep, final, metallic thud, a sound that severed him completely from the world outside. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The shrieking banshee howl of the wind was instantly muffled, transformed into a dull, distant roar like the sound of a faraway ocean. The violent physical assault of the sand ceased. He was encased in a cocoon of profound stillness, the air thick with the familiar, comforting smells of oil, old metal, and faint, lingering tea. Dust motes danced in the slivers of dim brown light filtering through the vision slits. He was inside the beast, in its belly, and it was a place of astonishing peace. The storm still raged. He could feel its immense pressure as a low, deep vibration through the hull, but it could not touch him. It was a fury held at bay, a monster locked outside the gates of this small steel sanctuary. He was utterly, completely safe. He sat in the driver's seat, the worn leather cool against his skin, and peered through the small, thick glass of the periscope. The view was a hypnotic, swirling chaos of brown and ochre, a vision of a world being unmade. Yet he felt none of it. He ran a hand over the cold, solid steel of the controls, the simple, functional levers and gauges, and in that moment of profound safety, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, with the quiet force of a tectonic shift. The Matilda was never meant to be a gazelle. It was never meant to dance. It was designed for this. It was designed to be a rock in a storm, a place of stillness in a world of fury. Its slowness was not a flaw. It was a statement of immovable endurance. Its heavy armor was not crude. It was a defiant rejection of the chaos that reigned outside its walls. His thoughts drifted to the faded photograph, to the smiling woman and child, to the man who had called this steel box his shield. He finally understood the profound empathy of its design. The British engineers had not built a weapon. They had built a promise to the men inside that they would endure the storm whether it was made of sand or of steel. This machine was a mobile fortress, a mother figure of iron, created with the singular purpose of protecting its sons in the most hostile environment on Earth. It was slow because its purpose was not to chase, but to survive. It was heavy because the weight of a man's life is a heavy thing to carry. The name the British soldiers had given it, a name he had once heard with cynical amusement, now resonated with the clarity of absolute truth. He leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the interior wall, closing his eyes. The distant, muffled roar of the Ghibli was now a lullaby. The contempt, the arrogance, the intellectual pride that had defined his world had been scoured away, not by the sand, but by the simple, undeniable truth of this machine. He had come to dissect an enemy, to expose its weaknesses and confirm his own superiority. Instead, he had found a teacher, a masterclass in a philosophy he had been too blind to see, a philosophy where resilience was the highest form of elegance, and survival was the ultimate expression of genius. He opened his eyes, looking into the dim, dusty interior of the silent tank, and whispered the words to the empty space, a confession and a coronation in one. "You are not a turtle," he said. "You are the queen." The Ghibli passed as it had arrived with a sudden final sigh. Alessandro pushed open the heavy hatch, and the world that greeted him was one of baptismal clarity. The air, scrubbed clean of its usual haze, tasted of cool, damp earth, a scent of life in a land defined by its absence. The sun broke through the retreating clouds, casting a gentle golden light upon a landscape remade. The camp was a scene of quiet devastation. Tents were shredded, equipment was half buried in new crescent-shaped dunes, yet the Matilda stood exactly as it had before, an island of absolute integrity in a sea of chaos. It wore the storm like a fine coat of dust, its solid form a silent testament to the fury it had so effortlessly ignored. In that profound morning quiet, Alessandro understood that he had not merely survived a storm, he had been granted a revelation inside its very heart. His final report, written over the course of the next day and night, was not a document of engineering. It was a testament. The pages were filled not with cold statistics, but with a newfound reverence for a philosophy he had once dismissed as primitive. He detailed the armor not by its thickness in millimeters, but by its profound psychological impact on the men it protected. He described the engine not by its horsepower, but by its unwavering, stubborn heartbeat in the face of the desert's corrosive breath. His own elegant handwriting was accompanied by new schematics, drawn with a draftsman's precision, but an artist's soul. He no longer sketched a clumsy machine. He drew a portrait of a survivor, capturing the brutal honesty in its unadorned lines, the deep, uncompromising welds, and the sheer, defiant mass of its form. It was a love letter to an enemy he had come to admire. History does not record how Alessandro's report was received in the marble halls of Rome, where theories of swift, glorious victory were more welcome than inconvenient truths from a distant, dusty front. A doctrine built on the myth of elegance and speed has little room for a lesson taught by a slow, ugly, and undeniably superior machine. Perhaps his words were filed away, dismissed as the ramblings of a man whose mind had been warped by the African sun. But the fate of the report was no longer the point. The truth once discovered cannot be undiscovered. A quiet, inconvenient seed of understanding had been planted in the mind of at least one brilliant engineer, a seed that would forever change the way he looked at the world and the machines men build to navigate it. The war would continue its brutal course, but for Alessandro the intellectual battle was over. The desert, in the end, was the ultimate arbiter of design, and its judgment was absolute. It is a landscape that does not reward vanity or haste. It rewards patience, endurance, and a deep, humble respect for its unforgiving nature. The Italian engineers had tried to impose their will upon the sand, to build a gazelle that could outrun the horizon. The British, however, had listened. They had built a machine that was a conversation with the landscape, a creature born of its challenges. They understood that in a place where everything is temporary, where the wind can erase the world in an afternoon, the only true victory is to endure. The Matilda was not a weapon designed to conquer the desert. It was a promise to survive it, a piece of a distant, green island sent to keep its son safe in a sea of unforgiving sand. Alessandro Rossi went to Libya to analyze a machine, but instead he dissected his own pride. He learned that the most profound knowledge is often hidden in the thing we are most conditioned to despise. True understanding does not come from confirming our own beliefs, but from having the courage to dismantle them, piece by painful piece. It requires us to step inside the world of our adversary, to see through their eyes, and to acknowledge the logic in their creation, even when it invalidates our own. This is the hardest journey for any mind to take, a pilgrimage from arrogance to empathy. If you believe that true wisdom begins with listening to the voice you least want to hear, let us know by writing "Listen" in the comments. It is a lesson that transcends war, a truth forged not in a factory, but in the crucible of a sandstorm. And so, the image that remains is not one of battle, but of stillness. A single squat tank sits under the vast, indifferent African sky, its silhouette a symbol of unyielding persistence. It is no longer a turtle, nor merely a queen. It is an answer, written in steel instead of words. It is the quiet triumph of purpose over aesthetics, of resilience over brilliance. For Alessandro, and for all who would learn its lesson, it stands as an eternal reminder that the measure of genius is not found in the complexity of its design, but in the simple, profound ability to bring its people home. For in the unforgiving arithmetic of survival, the most beautiful idea is not the one that moves the fastest, but the one that refuses to break.